Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, panel, audience. Welcome to the 4th edition of the Media Freedom Poll that we conducted now in 4 countries: Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. It's the 4th time, so we are building already on what we polled in the last years. And we have been particularly surprised this year how quickly the populations in these 4 countries took on board the huge change in the political spectrum that we experienced not only in the 4 countries being polled here, but in general in Europe and the world. So we're very excited to present this poll to you today here with a very large, as you can see, panel of experts, but not only is it large, they are all very, very sort of interesting players in the world of media, polling, and academia, and protecting media freedom in Europe and in their respective countries. So my name is Tessa Szyszkowitz. I am the chairperson of the Committee for Editorial Independence in the media house Ekonomia in Prague. I'm very grateful to everyone who came today. I will introduce you in a second, but especially that we could partner this year and have the support of the Slovak daily SME. I'm very happy to welcome Beáta Balogová, who welcomed us in Bratislava here today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for helping us set up this event. Also, our colleague Veronika Munk from the independent daily Denník is here. Thank you very much for being here. We had last year the event in Hungary, in Budapest. Márton Gergely from HVG is here. Thank you very much. We also have our colleague Martin Ehl from Ekonomia, from Hospodářské noviny. So it's very good to have you here again, as in the last years. And also, we presented in 2023 in Warsaw with Gazeta Wyborcza, and it's wonderful that we have this time Michał Olszewski here from Gazeta Wyborcza. And but that, of course, is not all. We have also the support of Reporters Without Borders in the last year. So we have our colleagues here, Alexandra Borchardt from the Austrian chapter of Reporters Without Borders, and also Pavol, Szalai. Well done, because we were discussing if the S said in the name in the Slovak, Hungarian, Polish, Austrian, German pronunciation, French pronunciation. He joins us today from Paris. So welcome to you, and also to Alexandra Borchardt, who is a member of the Committee for Editorial Independence for long years already. And she's a German media expert, especially dealing with digital issues concerning media development. So she will also give us her insights into our poll. And of course, my predecessor in the job as the chairperson of the committee is Misha Glenny, who is now the rector of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Thank you for coming over. It's just a hop from Vienna to Bratislava, and everyone always is in time, which is lovely. My special thanks, of course, and the biggest thanks goes to Ekonomia, who helped set up the Media Freedom Poll with all the technical support and the support also for media freedom in the last years. I'm very happy to have Lenka Czernak here, she is the CEO of Ekonomia. Thank you for coming. And also the biggest thanks maybe goes to the financial support of this Media Freedom Poll 2025, the Bakalau Foundation. And we have Václav here from the Bakalau Foundation. Thank you very much for coming. But the most important thing, of course, is if somebody can make a poll, if you have the expertise for polling. So we partnered with Median, the Czech polling institute, And our man from the Committee for Editorial Independence is, as always, Václav Štětka. Thank you very much for spending so much time and developing all the questions, building on 4 years of polling, asking people what actually is important for them in this age of social media and legacy media fighting for public attention. And what we found, what's really, really interesting this year is it is by now quite clear that people really care for media freedom and the freedom of speech. But what we found this year particularly striking is people not only want to have media freedom, they also want to have media freedom protected from interference, protected from interference of governments, but also from outside players. And interestingly, already after 3-4 months of the US administration changing, we can see that the US suddenly is being seen as a threat to media, to interference in independent media in Europe, which is something that I did not expect, I have to say. And it goes to say that people who are consuming media are often at least as aware of what's happening in media than people who are like us producing media. So without further ado, I would say Václav Štětka, please present the Media Freedom Poll 2025.
Okay, thank you, Tessa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this year's presentation of Media Freedom Poll. Also, warm welcome to everyone in the online virtual space, wherever you're watching us at the moment. It is my pleasure to introduce you to some selected findings from this year's Media Freedom Poll. As Tessa mentioned, it is a 4th edition, which makes it particularly interesting and exciting because we are not only able to compare the data across the 4 countries, but also across the 4-time period. And in addition, this year we have added some new questions about digital platforms and their regulation, because obviously we recognize that the information ecosystem is changing rapidly, and the debates about media freedom and their protection and its protection cannot be restricted solely to the world of legacy traditional media anymore. So before we go into the results, just a few words about methodology. As always, the poll is based on a representative survey of adult population in 4 Central European countries: Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary. In each of them we have polled about 1,000 respondents, and the polling was carried out by the Czech agency Median, and it took place in the 3 weeks of April. So very, very recent, very fresh data. So what did we find? Let's take a first look at the level of concerns people are expressing about the state of media freedom. And for the 2nd time in a row, Slovakia is the country with the highest percentage of people expressing concerns about media freedom, 65% this year, followed by Hungary with 61%. Comparing these data across the 4-year period, or compared especially with last year, we see relative stability compared to 2024, just a couple of percentage points difference maybe, in Poland in particular, but Czech Republic is the country where we see a rather significant increase by 5 percentage points of people being concerned about media freedom. And one hypothesis, which we can obviously elaborate on in the panel later in the discussion, could be that people are growing more concerned as we are approaching the upcoming parliamentary elections in autumn this year. And this is supported by looking at the breakdown of these concerns by voters for particular parties. This is a slide which shows voters of 2 main parties in each country: the main opposition party and main governing party, voters of those parties in the last legislative elections. So these are not electoral preferences, these are data from the last parliamentary elections, whenever they took place in each country. So if you look at Czech Republic, you can see that the voters of the currently governing party, Spolu, or coalition, grew more concerned by actually 11 percentage points compared to last year. Overall, the pattern is quite clear across the countries. Opposition parties, voters of opposition parties are significantly more concerned about media freedom than voters of governing parties. When we look at the perceived threats to media freedom from specific actors, we can see that in Hungary and Slovakia, people are most concerned about the government as the biggest source of threat to media freedom, compared to the other types of threats, other actors, so media owners or business interests, and digital platforms. In the Czech Republic, it's the media owners or business interests who are viewed as the biggest sources of threats. And actually, Czech Republic is also the only country in the whole region where more people are expressing concerns about digital platforms than about the government. So that's an interesting finding. Just like last year and the years before, we have asked people several sets of questions about media, their attitudes to media independence, autonomy, as well as about the level of media trust. So starting with political independence, most people, actually vast majority in all the countries, are very much supportive of media being politically independent from the government. Basically, the support is between 78 to 85%. In the Czech Republic, we see a gradual decline of that support from initially 86%, but it's still overwhelmingly supportive. People are also broadly supportive of media autonomy from undue interferences or influences by their owners. Majority of people in each country are very much aware that that's a precondition for media freedom as well. However, we do see a steady decline of the level of support. So fewer people than last year and the year before in 3 out of the 4 countries are supportive of media being independent of their owners. And likewise, we see a gradual decline of support for the idea that public service media should be independent from the government in terms of the content. So again, majority of people are in favor of politically independent content of public service media. However, this level of support has been on a decline in Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, as well as in Hungary, actually, compared to last year, at least. And again, we can maybe elaborate on that later in the panel. Just like last year, we have not only asked about attitudes to media freedom on the level of media as an institution as a whole, but we went down to the level of specific media types as well: public service media, commercial, print media, online, and social media. And we see, well, basically, there are a couple main takeaways from this graph. First of all, we see a general decline of trust across all those types of media and across all countries as well. And since we are in Slovakia, I think it's worth emphasizing or pointing out that we saw a sharp drop in the perceived public service media freedom in Slovakia down to the level which is actually below Hungary. And also to point out that social media and messaging apps are considered to be relatively the most free media type in all 4 countries. And as mentioned, we also ask not just about media freedom, but also perceived trustworthiness of all those specific media types. Again, a drop in the level of trustworthiness, so people trust all those types of media relatively less than last year. But there is an interesting exception to the general rule, namely that in Hungary, the trust in social media and messaging apps is higher than trust to all other types of media, all legacy media. So that's, again, something maybe for the panel to unpack. And I should also add something that is not in this slide, but in the long version of slides, which you have also received in the press release. So the trust in social media in Hungary is mainly driven by the opposition party voters. So those who are more sort of pro-liberal, pro-democracy are trusting social media and messaging apps much more than voters of Fidesz. So moving on from the perceived freedom and trustworthiness to what should be done to safeguard media freedom. We see very steady support for strengthening of national legislation to support, to protect media freedom, even though it has still, again, declined slightly, but it's still very much above the 2/3 of the population in each of the 4 countries. People are much less keen on economic support by the state as a means of supporting media freedom. In Czech Republic, as a matter of fact, more people are against the idea that there should be some subsidies or tax reliefs for media than people who are in favor of that. And with regards to the role of EU is still very much perceived as a powerful actor that should be involved in protecting media freedom. Across all 4 countries, we see majority of people supporting the idea that the EU should impose penalties or some kind of sanctions on countries whose governments interfere with media freedom. And the level of agreement with this role of EU has grown steadily in Hungary from 51% in 2022 to 60% just this year. So as I mentioned, we have added this year quite a few questions on people's opinions and attitudes towards digital platforms, digital content, and how it should be, whether and how it should be regulated. So starting with the role of the EU, again, majority of people in all the countries believe that EU should be able to sanction social media platforms who are somehow disrespecting or not abiding by the rules concerning online content. Most people are supportive of this idea in Poland, as a matter of fact, 66%. And if we look at the breakdown by this of these attitudes by electoral behavior, we see again a clear pattern. Pro-democratic liberal/liberal, pro-liberal parties are way more supportive of the EU as a regulator, as someone who imposes sanctions, than the voters of populist slash illiberal parties in all the 4 countries. Then we ask people about their opinions on specific types of digital content, problematic, if you will, digital content, and whether and how it should be moderated or taken care of by the platforms, by social media platforms. So this reaches from content promoting or encouraging terrorism over to content promoting self-harm, cyberbullying, violence against specific people, hate speech as well, all the way to false or misleading information related to politics. And as you can see from this rather complex graph, what it tells you is actually the fact that the overwhelming majority, almost 90% of people, 87, 89% of people, want some kind of action against either of the types of this content. In other words, they want social media platform to do something about it and not to just let it run freely. So either they want this content to be removed, that's overwhelmingly, that's the most popular option, or they want this content to be made less visible, so restricting the visibility, or they want the content to be amended by some kind of context. But either way, they want some form of action, and the percentage of people who don't want this action at all is really marginal, just 4 or 5, 3 percentage points. And if we zoom in on just the people who said that this content should be removed, we see a couple of things. First of all, this idea of a removal of content is most popular in Slovakia and in Poland, compared to Czech Republic and Hungary, where it is relatively less popular option. But majority of people agree on most type of content being removed. They are less sure about false or misleading information related to health. and less sure about the false or misleading information related to politics in particular. And that's in Czech Republic, actually more people want this type of content, the last row, information related to politics, to be rather restricted or amended with some kind of added context rather than removed. There's a general agreement or support for some form of action against misleading or deceitful manipulated content, especially with regards to content impersonating legitimate news sources or AI-generated deep fakes, if you will. So people do want this content to be taken care of. And there's also a general appetite for stronger pursuit of transparency of algorithms on the social media platforms. People believe that digital platforms should disclose more openly how they decide about whether to remove or what kind of content should be removed, what kind of content should be suppressed or promoted. People also want the digital platforms to emphasize, to prioritize trustworthy, legitimate and trustworthy content over the content from sources that are known to spread disinformation. The final block of slides relates to people's perceived concerns about threats to information environment coming from abroad. So we gave people several options, several countries, and asked them whether they are concerned about their potential influence on domestic media and public opinion. We did it for the second year in a row, so we can compare the changes. And as you can see, there's been an increase in people's concerns about Russia in 3 out of the 4 countries. In Hungary, actually, it went down for some reason. But by far the most interesting result or finding from this slide is, as you can see probably, the results related to the US. There's been a huge rise of people's concerns about the US across the board, across the 4 countries. Actually, the highest hike was observed in Slovakia. So that's something, obviously, for later discussion, I think. With regards to what's going on in the States. And following up on that, we have also added a question specifically on Elon Musk as an individual, a non-state but individual actor who, as obviously we know, has been influencing public opinion or trying to quite intensely in the late months. So there's people are concerned about Elon Musk quite a lot. In 3 out of the 4 countries, only in Hungary, the percentage of people concerned about Elon Musk does not exceed 50%. So these are just the average scores for people concerned about these particular actors across the B4 countries. So as you can see, actually and interestingly, the US is now the second most feared actor after surpassing even China by 1 percentage point, but still it's a fascinating result. So this is just breaking these figures down to electoral behavior. Again, clear pattern. Voters of parties who are more on the populist side of the spectrum are much less concerned about Elon Musk. Voters for liberal democratic parties, generally speaking, are way more concerned about his influence, and particularly voters of progressive Slovakia, 83% of them being concerned. So, a lot to unpack for the panel, a lot of data, and there's even more. If you're not satisfied with what you have just seen, you can check our website where there's where we have available the long version of the slides with a lot more cross tabulations, comparing those data by age, by electoral preferences as well. So, I hope you'll find it interesting, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Václav, for this incredible work and also for the specifics about it. Maybe we could go around here now on the panel to pick up specific results that are also relevant for each country. Beáta, if I could ask you first, Slovakia, of course, we are here, and we have seen in the last years here also a change in government we have seen how that influenced public service media. What we see now in this poll is that actually the trust, not only in the public television, went down, but also in the commercial media went down. So what do you think happened here?
I would probably start with a remark that saying and finding comfort in the fact that Slovakia is not yet Hungary is not correct, and the poll also shows us that it doesn't work. And the fact that the trust in public service television declines is just very closely monitors what has been happening around the public service television. The fact that the government very successfully penetrated the television, it was actually a very easy ride for them. Just most recently, they elected to the body which actually will elect, and today, the director of the Slovak public television. We now have a former advisor of Vladimír Mečiar, the notorious black hole prime minister. We have an abusive believer of flat earth theory. We have there a lawyer who is being criminally prosecuted. So it's just I'm just picking up a couple people who will influence who will manage the public service television. And even though the legislation, after a couple changes, might look fine for the European Union, even though I still believe that the legislation itself is not okay, it shows that the autocrats don't need legislation, and even though the legislation might look fine, they can still take over the public service media. And why also the trust in commercial media declined? Because in Slovakia the commercial media is under constant verbal attack from the government. And Robert Fico, since taking over, he has been very openly threatening and criticizing the public service Markiza television. And because the Markiza is owned by a investor who is very active in wide sphere, business spheres in Slovakia, so it's understandable that they cannot be completely ignorant, or they cannot completely ignore the voice of Robert Fico. What is actually interesting, and I would also pick up the fact that in Slovakia the trust in platforms and messaging channels is higher, even though these channels are one of the main source for politicians to spread misinformation and propaganda. And it is a paradox, because these platforms push back on media content or on serious information still, and they are not partners in communication. For example, just recently they blocked one of my posts in which I was supporting Peter Bardi, who was attacked by the Prime Minister, and I got never any answer from the platform why they blocked my entry. So I also would pick on the fact that even though the most serious issue is verbal abuse coming from social media, in Slovakia they approve the highest approval comes from removal of terrorism content, which might be linked to the fact that in a couple of days there will be a 1-year anniversary of the assassination trial of Robert Fico, and there was a lot of talk about calling it a terrorist act, and I think that respondents might have responded to that. Maybe I will stop and we can go back to other.
Well, fortunately, it was only an assassination attempt that failed. But I think we can maybe put down the result on this question on this specific point. But Veronika, if I can ask you, working also for an independent Slovak daily that is also a digital also media that is also active in actively writing and for a Hungarian audience and sort of being in this sphere. If you could think of how the situation now for media is changing in the legislation, also in terms of financing, and how, if it has become more or less complicated, and if this is also seen in the poll, in the results, on who to trust in as an actor, public financing, private financing, and financing from abroad or from sources like Denník N also had a very, very successful sourcing from micro donations from readers this year, this past month. So how would you see the situation reflected in the poll?
Yes, like watching these data and watching my home country Hungary's results and the country where I work in Slovakia, it's like the most alarming data appeared in basically every aspect. And the two countries are quite similar, that the polarization in the society results that people understand that that the governments are the largest actors of fear in terms of impact on media freedom of two countries. We were asked about the financial background and how financial independence can support for independence. Here in Slovakia is much more developed than in Hungary. Like Denník N, where I work, or Denník SME, where Beáta works, are quite successful in terms of readers' revenue. For instance, Denník N has like more than 80,000 subscribers, and like more than 80% of the revenue stream is coming directly from the readers. So it doesn't need to rely on much more on advertisement or any kind of subsidies or grants or institutional forces. There is a much diverse scene in terms of financial background in Hungary, where the still remaining independent media actors are somehow traditionally relies on institutional sources, not all of them, but like many of them, trying to keep their heads above the water financially while fighting their independency. And the government, the Hungarian government led by Fidesz, is using these facts. For instance, how many outlets were using American institutional resources in the past years, and as soon as the USAID sources were frozen by the Trump administration, the Orban government started their new kind of attack, which started with the so-called sovereignty authority, which main goal is to protect the Hungarian sovereignty, which means that basically they have right to research and to find actors from the civil society, from the media field, who they see as harmful actors of the Hungarian sovereignty, and which is just a super new news that last week the Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced that there will be a new law called the Transparency Law, which was not implemented yet. He just started to talk about that, but basically the aim of this new law, according to him, which was announced on a press conference that he attended, is the aim that like actors, like media outlets who somehow serve foreign causes, like America, the previous administrations accepted money from USAID sources, etc. They will be fined and they will be publicly, he used the word prosecuted or something like that. So it's quite strong language, which is, we got quite used to that the Fidesz government going from usually the economical side towards media outlets if they want to do something. We will see how it is going, but the other new aspect that the head of this sovereignty authority openly encourage people not to support
not to subscribe to independent media, not to spend your money on these outlets. So it's like a new propaganda campaign against independent outlets, which affects their financial sustainability, which affects their independent operation.
Makes us think a little bit of the foreign agent law in preparation that we know from Russia. Márton Gergely, because we are now talking about Hungary, one of the surprising results of this poll for me was that the concern of media freedom went a little bit down in Hungary among opposition voters. Why is that, you think?
I don't know. Well, we had a political earthquake the last couple of months. In the poll last year, as the poll was made last year, there were different oppositional parties fighting Fidesz. And since that, a new party emerged, which is right now leading in the polls. So we just looked at the data. Also in this data, Tessa has a comfortable lead among the political parties ahead of Fidesz. So it is really hard to see and feel where those people are who suddenly gathered behind Péter Magyar. Because it's not only the usual suspects in the Hungarian opposition, but also a new type of Hungarian voters. And Péter Magyar is communicating directly to them via Facebook. So this might be the cause why Facebook gained on credibility, because the voters of Péter Magyar are trusting Facebook to have the connection to him over Facebook. So they trust us, independent media, less, as Péter Magyar is trusting us, independent media, also less. So there's a new big political player, and the electorate behind it doesn't yet know what to think about the traditional media, the independent media, the propaganda. So the earthquake is happening on the political sphere, and we don't see yet where it leads in terms of the media perception, because we see how huge a difference is between a pro-European political movement, how they see media, and how the government as populist movements see media. But I think Veronika pointed at an interesting thing towards why the US is seen so much more problematic right now. It's because both sides are talking about the threats of the US. Because Orban is also speaking about the threats of USAID and the dollars coming in, but also at the same time opposition voters see the Trump chaos unfolding in the White House, and they are scared as well. So both sides are a bit more scared about the US, and that's why perhaps has the numbers did the numbers jump that much.
I mean, if you look at the situation in Hungary, which is always a little bit special among all the countries due to the government being for a long time already in the hands of one man, basically. But if you look at Poland, for example, we have now totally new results concerning also, you know, the threat level, of course, of Russia being seen as a threat to everything, not only media freedom, is in Poland naturally higher than in other countries because it's sort of closer to the actual war in the Ukraine. But Michał, maybe you could talk about it a little bit. You see a very clear drop in the concern about media freedom in Poland from 71 in 2023 to 55 in 2025. Is that just due to the change in government, or is it because other concerns like the concern about war is just dominating the public discussion?
Thank you for having me, but I would like to pay attention that I try to remember what happened last year to justify this slight increase in concern about media freedom in Poland. Because nothing wrong happened last year. We do not have slabs. State pressure has disappeared completely. We do not have lawsuits made by state-owned companies. So I ask myself, what is going on? Is it only statistical mistake, or is it something bigger? Maybe this is effect of fears of law and justice voters. For instance, we do not have public discussions about DSA in Poland at all. So only journalists were interested in this issue. So I cannot find an explanation, and I hope that it's only statistical inflation. Situation is much better as it used to be 2 years ago, and this is the very short answer. I feel that I can breathe after these 8 years of law and justice ruling. I think that independent media can take a brief. For example, if I remember correctly, during 8 years, we have more than 150 slabs from state-owned companies. Only Gazeta Wyborcza had about 150 slabs. So now, step by step, state-owned companies withdraw from these slabs, so we can feel better.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, the question that is always a little bit in between for Martin Ed now is the Czech Republic, where we sort of have results that go in different direction. Actually, one that I thought was quite interesting is to see that the perceived threats to media freedom coming from media owners went slightly up in the Czech Republic. Has this to do maybe also with the upcoming elections in the fall and media owners also campaigning for becoming prime minister?
I was trying to put together the time frame when the poll was done in Czech Republic and the debates in Czech Republic about two things, or maybe three things, which are probably influencing the Czech opinion. And I think first is elections, because probably in the end of the September, date is not set yet, but the latest date is, I think, mid-October. So elections and anything connected with that. But unlike in the previous years, where the main question connected with the media freedom/threat was ownership of the media by Mr. Babiš, by the big media group, which he sold already. Now the debate is concentrated around the public media. Around the first topic is the fee, which is financing the public media, and the second topic, which was just very actual, and this is, I think, influencing also the poll, is the debate about the director of the public television, because this guy was very unfortunately making many changes in the television. Then he somehow he had the support in the board of the television from the certain part of the politicians, but then he basically screwed up everything, and he lost support from all his enemies and friends. So now we are changing the director of the public television just a couple of months before election. So I think this is one of the things. But for the average person, I think the question of the fees, because we had to increase fee, and I'm working majority of my life in the private media, so I somehow don't understand the cries of my colleagues from the public media about how they do not have money. If I can judge that they have a lot of space to save, to say so, to save some money for the quality of work. But on the other hand, this is kind of attaching the topic of media freedom/threat to average Czech.
Maybe we can bring in here at that point talking about license fees, because that's a topic not only in the 4 countries polled, but has been a huge topic also in the Austrian election last fall. where the far right was campaigning for abolishing it, and some of the other parties are trying to sort of at least invent a new model of financing public service television without completely abolishing the responsibility that the financing needs to come somewhere except from advertising. And so, Alexandra Borchardt, if I can ask you how you think it influenced also the debate that Reporters Without Borders now found with the Press Freedom Index, where Austria suddenly played a little bit of a better role than it did in previous years.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Basically, we have to say Austria is doing much better. It's now on position 22. So if you look at the Visegrad 4 countries, it would be the second best after Czechia. The biggest improvement have happened in the economic context because, for example, there are more public subsidies to support quality journalism. But on the other hand, the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems in Austria, is that media outlets are so heavily dependent on public money. So it's not just about the ORF, the public broadcaster, but it's also about the traditional media outlets, as well as support, for example, for new online products, which are really hard, or they have it really hard to be on the market and stay on the market. Basically, I think Beáta said it, commercial media is under constant attack by the government. In Austria, the situation is that the public broadcaster, the ORF, is under constant attack by the Freedom Party, the far right and extremist party. So the Freedom Party is not part of the government now in Austria. As you know, there's a coalition between the Conservatives, the Social Democrats, and the Liberals. But the Freedom Party leads the polls. They have got, they are at about 33% in the polls, 11 points in front of the Conservatives, and they still dictate more or less the discourse on media freedom. And their discourse is about delegitimizing traditional media, legislative media, however you want to call it, just to shift the people to their media empire they have built. So is, for example, their YouTube channel, the alternative media scene and also chats like Telegram. So we have got a highly toxic situation, and the traditional parties are also responsible for it because of the influence on parties of the ORF. But this is a longer story, and I think I make a break now, but I want to explain what's here at stake at a later moment, if it's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, of course, Pavol, you have the sort of global view of Reporters Without Borders from Paris on the situation where the threats come from. I mean, you're probably at the moment mostly concerned that Palestinian journalists in Gaza are being killed in the hundreds by now. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how, if it is surprising for you that the European Union in these 4 countries is actually seen as a welcome player in protecting media freedom, because we were not so clear about that if there are sanctions being mentioned from the European Union, if that would be perceived as a threat and interference into people's and media lives in these countries, or in the fact that they are actually being welcomed in large numbers, as according to this poll. Is that a surprise to you?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. I think that the EU is perceived differently here in Central Europe than in Western Europe, and it's more seen through the lens of institution which either for some voters imposes some kind of cultural change or values, or for other voters as a potentially protector of rule of law, including press freedom. And unfortunately, I have to say that we have seen the EU Commission not playing a very strong role recently, the new European Commission, not being very vocal about this issue. But we hope that that will evolve and that the EU, for example, hasn't said its last word on the, for example, on the law on public broadcasting in Slovakia, because we believe it's totally not in line with the European Media Freedom Act voted last year. And you know, just one example, the person mentioned by Beáta, Luboš Machala, he's vice chair of the council of the public broadcaster, and at the same time he has the third highest position in the Ministry of Culture. So we really cannot talk about any independence of this board, which is supposed to oversee the independence of the public media. Maybe a few words about the situation in the region as we see it in the World Press Freedom Index, and where I see the connections and the correlation with this poll. So in the index, Slovakia and Hungary go down, and Slovakia is now half the way between Czech Republic and Hungary, so 30 spots from both from Czech Republic and Hungary, which means that in about 3 years, if Hungary's position doesn't change, Slovakia will be on that level. We could say that, so a little bit anecdotically. And I'm glad that we can see that in Slovakia there is a higher concern for press freedom in the poll, as we also see it in our index. In Poland, Czech Republic, they go up on the other hand, and this can be attributed really to the political situation, the political factors, Poland is now higher than Slovakia. And really the theme, and that you suggested, that you mentioned, is the public media. Like we can really see the differences in the trend. So in Poland there have been attempts to make the public broadcasting more independent. You know, it's very much an improvisation, etc. It needs to be done more systematically, and I understand the reasons. But the situation has improved. On the other hand, the situation of the independence of the public media in Slovakia has diminished, and in the Czech Republic it has improved, as was discussed with the license fee reform. And on the other hand, in Hungary, you know, it's been stably bad. And Hungary's position doesn't change in the index. And we can see that there are two specificities regarding this region as compared maybe to Western Europe. The first is really this sensitivity to the political cycles. So it will have the Czech election, but this is really very determining and too much determining for press freedom in the region. And the other specificity is the external influence from both Russia and now from the US, which is negative, and actually the decisions of the Trump administration amplify the negative impact of the Russian propaganda and of the Russian Federation here. You know, we can talk about US aid and how it's used in the communication of the local authoritarian politicians. We can talk about the liquidation of Radio of Europe and Voice of America, which also have been reaching the public in this part of Europe. And it's interesting to see that in the poll there is a perception of this negative US influence for whatever reason it can be. And I will conclude by saying that we can see really in this part of the world these tectonic shifts regarding press freedom in Europe, which determine its future on the whole continent. And this is also why, as RSF, we have been considering setting up a regional office in Prague.
That actually seems to be a very good idea, although we would sort of probably need in every of the countries an office specifically sort of focused on every sort of regional problem that we could find. But Alexandra Borchardt, you're a media researcher, also a journalist, former journalist, but specifically dealing with digital media and threats coming from that side. And it's quite interesting because in our daily debate about digital media and social or unsocial media, we have the feeling that we need to see how we can ride this beast. How can we regulate social media? How do we deal with the toxic fear of social media? And now we see in this poll that people here in some countries think that social media is actually more independent and giving them more information or free information than other players in the media sphere. So how do you connect these two ways how we think about social media?
Yeah, thank you, Tessa. The major finding that I can see from this poll is really that people are smart. People very sensitively react to changes in the environment. And let me make the case here, and let me give you more of a bird's eye perspective on this. The general narrative is, and it's also supported by the data, for example, of the Digital News Report of the Reuters Institute that I'm affiliated with. The general narrative is that legacy media, traditional media are good because they're independent, they're free, they help to connect the people with the right information, the correct information, whatever, and social media are really, really bad. They need to be regulated. Well, people who express their opinions in this poll, they think differently about this because obviously they sense that the legacy media are not as free as they're supposed to be. They don't trust it too much. They feel that they're actually victims of state capture, and we've heard many voices here on this panel supporting this view that state capture is actually a big issue. So people are smart and they say, okay, then let's move to social media. Let's go to the social networks because these are my pockets of freedom where I can express myself, where I can find a variety of opinion, where I can really listen to lots of different voices. But this is not in the sense that J.D. Vance, the US vice president, said that at the infamous Munich Security Conference this year, like, you in Europe, you do censorship and the free expression is actually with us in the US. No, it's the other way around. People feel like these are our pockets of freedom and we want these pockets to be protected, and we need them to be protected by institutions like the European Union. And this is why there's actually lots of content that we don't want to have on there and that needs to be regulated and taken out. And everyone who has really dealt with these issues of removal of content or rating content down or making content less visible, whatever, knows how really super difficult this is. I was also a part of the expert committee on freedom of expression and digital technologies at the Council of Europe a couple of years ago. And we really had lots of debates on this. And the only thing we could really agree on was really, let's remove illegal content, or let's really regulate illegal content, but the rest of the content should be free because it is freedom of expression. But people don't seem to want to stop it there because they feel very uncomfortable with content that is disturbing, for example, threatening the health of their children. So people are really, really skeptical of is that freedom that is there on social media can be protected. And actually, I'm not surprised, as some people are, that they feel like removal of political information is like their least favorite. Well, this is because it's so super difficult to actually draw a line on what to remove, what is actually really misinformation and disinformation, or what is just political opinion. So they are sort of torn, should we just let this go? Should we just downrank this? So it's really, people are really smart in that aspect also, that they know, when you have a terrorist threat, you know what that is. When you encourage people to harm other people, you know that this is, not what we want. But political opinion, as some interview partner that I recently interviewed said, like, you can't moderate away disagreement. You can't really fact check away disagreement. So people are really smart in that sense also, and that's why I find this poll extremely useful and valuable also for the general media discourse, for the international media discourse that is much more black and white in terms of here's the good legacy media and here's the bad social media.
Misha, let's zoom out a little bit from local situation, maybe. I mean, one of the really striking results here about the concerns about influence of specific countries or actors on domestic media and public opinion, we have touched on it already. It's quite astonishing to see that the US is being perceived by many as a threat. But, you know, if you look at it and it says 58% think that China is a threat and 59% think it's the US. In my lifetime, I would not have expected it.
Thanks, Tessa. Let me first of all reiterate what Alexandra was saying about the encouraging and positive message that we get from this poll, and that is a considerable majority of people are concerned about assaults on their media freedom. So that's the sort of baseline optimism I have. I want to have a look in terms of Central Europe very briefly at where we were 18 months ago before the election in Poland in September or October 2023. We were staring at the possibility of another peace government in Poland, along with Fico, which happened later on in Slovakia, the possibility of Babiš, Orban still in power, and the strong possibility of Kikel taking the chancellery in Austria. Things look very grim there. They don't look quite as grim now politically as they did then, in as much that Orban is under real threat, as Márton explained, even if the jury is still out about what Péter Magyar is really about. I take that into account, but nonetheless, Orban is under threat. Vučić in Serbia is facing a full-scale uprising, effectively, at the moment. Fico has had difficulty maintaining his government in Slovakia, and it's a very big if, Szyszkowitz wins the presidential election in Poland, then you have a real strengthening of democratic forces, and those forces which demonstrably, as Michał said, lead to a reduction in concern in people's concerns about media freedom. And if that were to happen, I think you'd see that Babiš, who is much more of an opportunist than the rest of them in the Czech Republic, would seek more moderate allies as opposed to the hardline allies, which are also his opportunities. So I don't want us to drown in pessimism, which is not to say that the situation isn't really serious. But in terms of the media, there are a couple of things. I don't want to add to the incredible work that Václav has done with the media poll, but it would also be interesting, and maybe in the deeper dive it's there, to look at things in terms of age, and also to look at things in terms of people's understanding of media structure, i.e. not just who owns the media, but who owns the communication methods which actually bring the media to your device. And I will come to that in a sec when it comes to Elon Musk and the United States and the threat that Tessa was addressing. So clearly we have seen both in Romania and in Poland as well, and in Austria, that those people who seize the narrative on digital media accrue real political benefits. So, for example, in Poland at the moment, Sławomir Mencen, who is the far-right candidate for the presidential election, and in third place is polling about 14%. But if you have a look at what his what the voting intentions are between 18 and 25-year-olds, he's on about 40%. So that is a real significant difference and needs to be understood. You mentioned FPÖ TV on YouTube. The FPÖ have taken to social media like ducks to water in a way that the other parties in Austria have not done. They absolutely dominate social media, and as a consequence, this accrues incredible political benefits to them, particularly outside of Vienna. None of the other parties, I watch FPÖ TV on a regular basis to see what they're doing. It's professionally managed, it's professionally produced, and there's no other political party which is doing anything like this. So it's a real concern, this, but it's also up to other political forces to understand what is going on and to do something about it, to do something about it themselves. The real threat, which you alluded to, Tessa, is the issue of public service TV and how you finance this. Now, you have active hostility to public service TV from people like the FPÖ, who say that they want to get rid of the general charge that the public pays for the ORF. But you have a structural issue here as well, which particularly affects somebody like the BBC, but it will affect Polish public broadcasting and Austrian public broadcasting, and that is the creeping domination of streamers. This is a much bigger topic, but it's one that has to be addressed in this mix when discussing public service broadcasting. And as regards the digital content in the United States, Trump, Musk, etc. Well, the first thing is that Trump has had a positive effect in certain political environments, or at least I would perceive it as a positive effect. We've seen that in Canada, we've seen that in Australia, and we've seen that in terms of the Tesla sales here in Europe and even in the United States. But what is Musk really up to? Twitter itself, X, is on the way down. People are leaving X in significant numbers, and its influence is largely sustained by politicians' use of it and lazy journalism, using Twitter as an easy way to create a headline. But what Musk is really up to is he is looking at the skeleton of information exchange of communications networks. And he is doing this through Starlink. Starlink now has 6,000 satellites circulating around the Earth. The nearest competitor is Eutelsat, which has 630 satellites circling around the Earth. And Eutelsat has said it will not enter the consumer market, where Musk is concentrating on the consumer market in the United States, but also everywhere else in the world. And he is looking to control not just internet connections, but he's had a big success recently in the United States with the Federal Communications Commissions, whereby he will be allowed to use Starlink for telephone communications. This has huge implications for the United States, but also for Europe. All of our network systems ultimately are influenced by huge American corporations. And Donald Trump has demonstrated in the last 3 months that if he requires an American communications network to bend to his policy will, they will do it. We have seen that in Ukraine. We know how this works now. And so Europe is facing actually an even greater challenge than I think it understands now in terms of control of its own communications networks. And although that seems like a distant thing at the moment, it will have immense impact on our media and our freedom of expression. So I think that the work that the Media Freedom Poll does is actually really illuminating in so many ways. But at some point we need to start engaging even beyond that, even beyond how the parochial is functioning, and to see what the bigger picture is in terms of control now that the United States appears to be detaching itself from Europe, but is nonetheless still deep inside the mechanism and guts of European communications.
Well, thank you. I mean, we have a couple of minutes, or like 15 minutes left of our time. So I would like open the debate also to the hall if we have any questions, but also to the panel to just pick up maybe on 2-3 themes that came up now in the last hour. One thing that I find quite interesting is, do we have a question online? Hannah, would you maybe read it to us?
On Slido, we have actually 4 questions. 2 of them regard regulation. First question, is the regulation keeping up with the threat of disinformation and manipulative algorithms? If government moves too slowly, foreign states or profiteers will cause chaos. And I would just like to add another question on regulation. Do you think there needs to be regulation to combat the dead internet theory? Social media companies seem happy to allow bots to dominate online discussion.
Okay, so these are general questions which are not specifically or addressed to one of you, but I think it could be quite an interesting experiment also to ask, for example, Beáta, you, what do you do if you think about regulation and you have people sort of trying to spread this information also over the website, coming to you, after you, on social media? How much regulation do we need, and is the regulation being offered by the EU but also by the government? Here, is it enough, or is it the wrong one, or what do we need?
First, I would like to stress that if the EU would do enough job to enforce the regulation which is already existing, that would be great. And I think that, of course, the Media Freedom Act is going into full force this October, but already now, when I had discussions with some lawyers from the EU, I have heard the concerns that if we look at certain laws, you know, they don't really, we can't clearly say that they violate some of the provisions. And it's not only the Media Freedom Act, but it's the rule of law. And I think unless the EU starts looking at the laws and the national regulations, like good judges do, that they look at the intent as well, not only the wording of the law, we are not moving ahead. And also I am in favor the European Union to be more aggressive in regulating the platforms. Because also, again, going back to the Media Freedom Act and some of the EU legislation regarding platforms, we journalists were promised that these regulations and the ongoing discussion with Meta would elevate us to the position of partners when talking to the platforms. I haven't experienced any of that yet. We are at most, like the best version scenario is that we are sort of VIP clients, but that doesn't work either. And I don't think that the media should be a client to the platform. We should be partners, and seeing how artificially the platforms are pushing back our content and enforcing political content. And I completely understand what was said, that it's very difficult to regulate and to delete disinformation when it comes to political content. But I think that with a clearer message to the platforms about the ratio of news and information, and how more transparency, how our content is being treated by the platforms would really help the situation.
Martin Il.
On this specific field of regulation, I had a quite significant experience, which leads me to one very doomy conclusion. I was moderating a couple of months ago the debate in Czech Parliament about the experience of Romania and TikTok and what we can take out of that for our elections in Czech Republic. But there were some, and many people around the table, there were journalists, politicians, experts, sociologists, were speaking like Beáta about EU must do this, EU should do that. But then I was talking to the guy sitting next to me, which was the head of the Czech telecommunication regulator, and then I understood where is the trick, which leads me to this doomy conclusion that it's not EU. According to the EU regulatory framework, in each member country there is institution which is the bridge between EU and the country, and which is supposed to do this work. This is the connection between us and the EU regulation framework, and then you can push the big companies, big social networks. But if the local national institution doesn't work, like in Czech Republic, because there is no law which is putting that into the practice, then we can just complain here, there, but nothing will happen. And given the poor state of public institutions in many of our countries, I am not like very optimistic that EU regulation will work as such.
Yeah, may I add one thing? I don't know if my mic works. Yeah, now it's working. Just one slight thing to follow up on what Martin said, that if these institutions are loyal to the current populist government, like in the case of Hungary, the media authority is just like basically favoring everything what the Fidesz party would like to do with the media, generally speaking, then hearing the word that state should regulate somehow even the large platforms or the media field gives me chilling, because those are not in every case independent authorities in these countries.
Pavol, please.
Yes, so the Commission is clearly not using all its competences it has according to a DSA, so it's a competence of the Commission to sanction and regulate the platform. That's the first thing. And if we don't like the word regulation, we can just talk about transparency when it comes to platforms, sorry, because we have no idea like how these algorithms work. And the third thing is that we must oblige the platforms to promote trustworthy information, journalistic information, to the detriment of fake news. And the last thing I will say is that, you know, we wouldn't have so much of this Russian propaganda if we didn't have it on the social networks. This is how it's spread mainly.
Alexandra, maybe you can also address a little bit the question on the bots.
Yeah, particularly the question on regulation. There's actually no way that regulators can really keep up with the speed of the technological development, and I completely agree with Beáta, who said it would be really great if they could keep up with, you know, compliance with the laws that are already out there. Nevertheless, what we haven't talked about is what's happening now with artificial intelligence, and important is, I think, from my perspective, to also have a positive to have a positive interpretation on what regulation could achieve, other than just deleting content that people don't want to have or that threatens freedom or whatever. It's even more important to really promote quality content, to promote free and independent quality journalism. And for example, Reporters Without Borders has this journalism trust initiative that could be used to really favor content that is really done by quality outlets. So this will be a major question. How can we actually make sure that we have an information environment in the AI age where people can still trust that information that's out there, that people can still see that trustworthy and factual information is surfaced in these AI search environments. So that is really, even I think, much more important to have this positive, constructive approach of surfacing quality information, because you will never be able to regulate all the bots or all the bad content that's out there. That's just that's no reason. But really making sure that quality content is brought to the surface. This is a big challenge in this new age of artificial intelligence mediated information.
Michał.
Very shortly, I would like to pay your attention on a very disturbing and very interesting detail, which is in Survive. If I understand correctly, half of respondents believe that fake news on health and politics shouldn't be removed. What does it mean? From my perspective, it means that the level of acceptance for this type of contents is extremely high. Half of respondents. And I wonder what we should do. I thought how to comment it, and I found the answer not far away from here. On the wall, there is a big billboard made by our colleagues from Standard with only one question. Do you know what propaganda is effective? And there is a very strict answer, half true. And it bothers me and worries me, unfortunately, this part of survey.
And Misha, you wanted to.
Yeah, just on the regulation of social media platforms, there is not a single social media platform that was developed and is owned by Europeans. They're either owned by the Americans or the Chinese in the case of TikTok. Now that we have Donald Trump and we have J.D. Vance explaining what, from his perspective and the United States perspective, freedom of speech means, i.e. let any bullshit go and don't regulate, that's partly an ideological thing, but it's also an economic thing, because while Trump wants to put tariffs on manufactured goods coming into the United States, the other side of that coin is he doesn't want any tariffs or hindrance to digital services created in the United States, by which we're talking about Meta, LinkedIn, X, etc., etc. And we have seen with the US-UK deal recently on trade that the British government has agreed to lower taxes on digital services, i.e. to give restricted access of American platforms into the UK. And this is the problem facing Europe, is that these are the only social media platforms that exist, and if we attempt to regulate them, as we have attempted to do with AI and to a degree social media, what do we get? We get attacked from the United States, and not just verbally, but in economic and political terms as well. So Europe faces a bigger challenge than regulation alone can solve.
All right. So first of all, thank you, Márton, for dropping the microphone, because you indicated that our time is up. But to conclude, maybe, let me just say that what we've heard today from the poll and also from the panel is that we expect the European Union institutions to actually enforce the Media Freedom Act that comes into force in the fall. We have a lot to do on regulations within national governments to think about who the actors actually are that people perceive as threats and how to deal with them. We know that the digital age has a huge challenge to all media, the legacy media as the digital media, and that we have to see that we balance out interests of companies to even be developed in the European Union with the need to protect media freedom for the citizens of the European Union and sort of countries that went astray, like the United Kingdom. But also, and one thing that I always hear also what you said before about the public broadcasters in all the countries needed to become more independent from governments. I think They should be, by statute, of course, independent in their editorial content. But we know how it has been in the years always, and that's not only in Poland it's also in Austria the case, that every incoming government thinks that's their plaything, and they are sort of in putting their people in place. And I think the key word in this, and that goes also for Poland today, is pluralism. Pluralism in public broadcasters. Don't only bring in your own government people, bring in the opposition, because that guarantees that people perceive a media, a public or a private broadcaster, as a independent player. And I think self-criticism is always a good thing for everyone. And for us as media producers, as journalists, I think what we can do to help the very precious media freedom that we enjoy, or hopefully will enjoy in all the countries we are from, is to produce quality media, quality journalism, in order to keep up a free space where public debate can happen and where we can then deal with the threat level of all these evil actors that we have mentioned, but also all the good actors that are trying to keep up a free platform for media and for public political debate. So I want to thank all of the panel, of course, for coming. I want to thank SME for the support of this event. I want to thank Reporters Without Borders for being in support with us for the past years. I want to thank Economia for setting up all this really tricky technical equipment here, and also Hanna Schreibova, of course, for your always completely in detail planned scheduling and agendering of us, and also Economia in general, but also, first of all, the Bacalov Foundation for financing our important Media Freedom Poll 2025. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and have a good day.